This is Audible.
Audible Originals presents The Other Animals. Written and performed by Lulu Miller, Shruti Swamy, Kelly Weinersmith, R. Eric Thomas, Ken Liu, Daniel Mallory Ortberg, Kaeli Swift, and Max McClure.
Editor's Note by Rachel Hamburg. The Other Animals has 3 reasons for existing. The first is love, the second is illness, and the third is delight. First, love. I fell in love with someone who really likes rats. Our romantic relationship began long distance, and a few weeks in, he sent me a photo of his 3 tiny pets, Marvel, Edna, and Leah. I think for a lot of people, pet rats would be an instant romance death blow. New Yorkers especially are viscerally anti-rat, unless the rat is doing something every New Yorker can identify with, carrying a piece of pizza down the subway stairs. Rats represent dirt, disease, invasion of privacy, and perhaps most threateningly, another species that is living more successfully than most human New Yorkers. The first time I came to visit Max, I arrived outside his apartment building wearing a black dress that I had, as is my way, covered up with a large men's sweater. I was nervous. We shared a long elevator ride up to his apartment, and to break the ice, he opened up his rat cage and put the rats on my shoulders. I know this will make a lot of listeners tense up, but picture small, shiny-eyed, furry water balloons with gentle star hands ruffling your hair. We played with the rats for a few minutes, letting them walk up and down our arms, making conveyor belts with our hands. Then Max put them back in the cage and gently pulled me towards him. He wrapped his arms around me, and we kissed for the first time. Max was a medical student then, but he had also been a field tech assisting research biologists, and I quickly learned and immediately loved his obsession with animals, especially animals with unusual minds. He's worked with squid, ticks, mice, and sage grouse. He got the rats partially because they're a model organism, a species that gets poked, injected, and killed in lab settings so that scientists can extrapolate their findings to other species, usually us. He wanted to treat some rodents very well, as a sort of karmic rebalancing act. And he did treat them well. I used to actually get jealous of how much he loved his rats. I would walk into the apartment after work, and he'd be there holding them, pinching Cheerios between his fingers that they would grab and hunch backwards with in happiness. He would open his arms to me and embrace me while the rats climbed across our shoulders. "My girls," he would coo. On an early camping trip, picture butterscotch pines and bullfrogs plowing through floating leaves, Max taught me about the concept of Umwelt. Umwelt means the world that an animal experiences. The attempt to see through an animal's eyes in its social and physical environment to grasp its Umwelt comprises an entire scientific field which is called ethology. Ethologists ask questions like, how do low-status chimpanzees curry favor with the matriarch? Or, how do dogs play fight without actually hurting each other? Paying attention to an animal's Umwelt seems to lead ethologists over and over again to a particular conclusion. Animal cognition is more interesting, advanced, and specialized than we give it credit for. And this lack of credit is perhaps most true of what I'll call the other animals. Animals who, for some reason or another, are out of favor with the human imagination. Animals who are considered especially unlike us. I include rats in this group because, outside of lab scientists, most humans don't care for rats or think generously about their minds. I also think of insects and species we associate with sickness or death, such as vultures and crocodiles. So, love. Love of Max, love of Umwelt, love of the other animals is the first reason I wanted to make this book. That brings me to the second reason, illness. Half a year into living with Max in New York, I had a flare-up of obsessive-compulsive disorder, a condition that I did not know I had, but had been managing badly for years. OCD can take on a few forms, but this episode, at least, involved me relentlessly weighing the pros and cons of a decision until it felt like there were infinite stakes, and I stopped sleeping. I wrote a note to myself on a small whiteboard beside my bed that said, "Go forward. It is your only option. Take joy in the universe. You are safe. You are safe." I would get up in the middle of the night and stand in front of it, trying to convince myself. I was not quite safe. I didn't sleep for 5 days, entered into a dream state/psychosis, and was eventually hospitalized. If you've ever been through a mental health hospitalization, you might recognize the following. My deep fears were, will I survive? Will I be loved? And will I ever work again? At the hospital, I joined people with a host of mental conditions, some of whom were far from passing as neurotypical. I encountered a woman who thought she was a squirrel, and a woman who insisted she was not a mouse. There were moments when I felt like the goal of the ward might be to hide us sick people from normal people, rather than to make us better. But Max and my mom visited me every day, bringing me bean pies from the bodega and calming volumes of Alexander McCall Smith's #1 Ladies Detective Agency. In fact, many, maybe most of the people in the ward had visitors. Parents or friends or lovers who would come in with bagels or cakes or coloring books, walk around silently with them, or chat quietly in the corner of the common room. As stand-up comic Maria Bamford, who lives with bipolar disorder, has pointed out, the right people are capable of loving you through some rough and strange things. I did recover fully, both in the hospital and outside of it, though it involved some harrowing experiences. Since I was delusional when I entered the hospital, I was prescribed antipsychotics, but no one told me that they might have severe side effects. When my muscles started locking up and my limbs began shaking uncontrollably, I thought I might die. When I went back to the emergency room, they gave me another drug to combat the tremors and began to phase me off the antipsychotics. Now, instead of barely being able to walk, I began involuntarily pacing for hours at a time. I remember galloping over to Max in our apartment, somewhat feverishly, yelling, "I'm Seabiscuit!" and us both helplessly laughing. It was, in short, a dramatic change in Umwelt. When I had the tremor, the short trip to the bathroom became an epic journey. My whole mind had to focus on stopping the shakes long enough to take off my pants. During the pacing phase, restaurants became hostile territory, because even though my mind was otherwise normal, I was physically incapable of stillness. Every few minutes, I'd have to hop up like a nervous bird and move around the premises in loops, pretending to admire the decor. As I got better, one of the rats got sick. We tried to nurse her back to health, feeding her Cheerios and purple medicine from an eyedropper. This was a rat that we were watching for another friend, and by chance, this rat shared my mother's name. It was a funny thing to recover from my own traumatic and embarrassing experience on the 5th floor of a hospital in Brooklyn, and then return to my very own stigmatized animal, who shared the name of my mother and struggle and fail to make it well. Nancy was dead one morning when I woke up. I put her in the freezer. Months later, Max and I sent her out into the Hudson on a small raft next to some cheddar cheese. There's a strange parallel between the experience of being loved as a crazy person and loving an animal that everyone else thinks is unworthy of affection. It requires curiosity and an openness to mental states that are interesting and foreign. It requires an attitude that both acknowledges what is peripheral, strange, or painful, but does not diminish the dignity of the other. So illness is another reason I wanted to make a book like this. Peering into animal minds might give us practice in loving what is strange to us. Finally, delight. I have been a professional maker of things for a few years. A lot of my work involves squinting at a computer, melding my mind with Pro Tools or some other editing program to make a piece of entertainment or instruction or art, like this one. I feel 1,000,000% confident that nothing I have ever made comes close to how cool an animal is, human or otherwise. And this feeling has only grown stronger since I was sick. Maybe it's a response to nearly losing my ability to work. Maybe it's simply the effect of living inside the giant and sometimes rather bleak monument to human invention that is New York. But there's a wonderful comfort to knowing that I can simply walk out of my building and watch a sparrow, light as a ping-pong ball and covered in perfectly evolved fluff, washing itself in the park's dust. My hope is that this book will invite you into that delight. The writers in the other animals come from many different backgrounds and life experiences. One story is written by Max. The other stories are by comics, animal scientists, literary writers, and more. Each one of them is someone whose work I deeply admire. Each person chose their own animal, and most of them chose other animals, animals that don't normally get a ton of attention in the literary world. I instructed everyone to incorporate some real animal cognition, but with considerable license taken, as this is not a scientific text. Rather, it is one meant to invite you into the idea that an animal's internal life might be interesting, valuable, tragic, funny, and might give us some insight into our own strange experiences. I hope you enjoy it.